All right, Mark chapter 3. So did you catch that Cody and I had a miscommunication this week? We sent out saying the questions would be available on the email, and then the email came and went. You didn't have any questions on there? Yeah, so Cody has an uncle who just got transferred over to hospice care. His mother-in-law is in ICU, and between us trying to communicate to each other and get this stuff up, it just didn't happen. So that's why, if you were wondering why you didn't get it, which I'm sure all of you were because you're such good Bible students in class, right? I'm sure your entire weekend was wrecked because you couldn't find it. Well, that's why. So, we are in Mark chapter 3. You were supposed to read Mark chapter 3. That much you could do. So as you read through Mark chapter 3, what stood out to you in your reading? Who's there? We're still working on the Sabbath, aren't we, Danny? Jesus is still out here. He's still doing work. He's still working on the Sabbath. He's still healing and doing these miracles. That's going to be problematic for whom? For whom? The Pharisees, right? The Jews. They're not going to appreciate that very much. That's really going to come to a head here in chapter 3. What else you got going on here in chapter 3 that stood out to you? Jeff?
Well, you have the famous verse that Abraham Lincoln quoted at the time of the Civil War about the house divided.
Mm-hmm.
Cannot stand.
Yeah.
And then you've got Jesus kind of implying that his mother and siblings hadn't become his disciples yet. Or at least that's kind of the indication. Whoever does the will of God is my brother and my sister and my mother.
So you've got, if it's not directed towards his family, it's just a picture of the acceptance in the family that is found, certainly, by disciples.
People were saying he was crazy if his family was looking for him.
Yeah,
He's got an unclean spirit.
that's right. Gloria, you were saying something. The healing, all right. Glenn?
Mine was just, the unclean spirits recognizing him when the scribes who were supposed to recognize him don't.
Yeah, this isn't quite a 1980s picture of demon possession, is it?
No.
Right? Your head twirling around backwards, vomiting out pea soup and all of that. That's not quite the New Testament picture of what demon possession actually looked like. He calls the 12 here, sets them forth as apostles in chapter 3. You've got people crowding in around Jesus again. And then you've got what ends up being, at least to many, a very confusing statement, verses 28 and 29, where Jesus talks about what? Your Bible may even have the heading of what?
Sinning against the Holy Spirit.
Yeah, the unforgivable sin, right? And that makes us pause for a moment, because what sin is there that Jesus' blood is not sufficient to take away, right? And so when we get over there, I think we're going to have something to talk about. So here are the questions from chapter 3 that we didn't get out, but you'll get them today and we'll send them out as well. What question does Jesus pose on the Sabbath to make the Pharisees think? Who were the Herodians? Contrary to popular presentation, how did the demons respond when they saw Jesus? The scribes accused Jesus of casting out demons. How, who, or what was Beelzebul? What happens to divided houses? Jeff has answered that for us already. And then who is in Jesus' family? Jeff, you've answered some of these questions for us already. Good job. What question is it? We can answer this one right away. What question does Jesus pose on the Sabbath to make the Pharisees think? Very beginning of chapter 3. What's the question?
Is it lawful?
Yeah, is it lawful? Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath? We're going to talk about the Herodians in just a second, and that should be as much as we're going to get through on our study today. Let's talk about, before we get any further into the text itself, let's take a moment and jump back and talk about some of the groups that are present here in Mark's gospel account. First off, of course, one of the main groups we have are the Jews. Who are the Jews? Start easy. Here's the softball. Okay, just knock it out of the park. Who are the Jews?
God's chosen people.
God's chosen people.
Remnant of Israel.
Remnant of Israel. Abraham's lineage. Very good. Also called the, Clint gave us the Israelites, also called the Hebrews. That's right, okay.
Aren't these descendants of the ones who came back from Babylonian captivity?
Most likely, yes. Most likely, yes. You have some from the northern 10 tribes that went off into Assyrian captivity, a few who may have trickled back in. I think Acts chapter 2 kind of makes that clear for us. But the majority of them would have been those that had family that returned from the Babylonian deportation. All right? People of Israel, descendant of Abraham, those are the Jews. Why are they so important in the biblical narrative? Why are the Jews kind of this central group to the Old Testament?
Chosen nation.
Chosen in what regard, Clint?
Promises to Abraham.
Promises made to Abraham, I'm going to make of you a great nation, and in your seed all, what? All the nations of the earth are going to be blessed. That's right. So we've got Abraham through his descendants. Suddenly we come to Matthew chapter 1 and verse 1, and we're introduced to Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of... Nope. Abraham. Did you say Abraham, Glenn? Nope. Okay. Well, it sounded like Abraham, so you get partial credit. All right. Son of Abraham, right? So that's why the Jews are important. They are kind of the focal point of the Old Testament. They are the chosen people based upon God's promises to Abraham. They are the people through whom the Messiah is going to come. So that's really, really our big one there. And they are the people to whom what is given? To whom the law is given, right? Okay. Does that mean everyone who was not a Jew did not have a law?
No.
Nope. Romans 2 makes that clear. They did have a law. But what kind of made the law that the Jews had different?
It was their secular law as well as religious law.
You've got a religious and a secular law together. And in this case, it was written down, right? Versus, Paul's going to talk about the Gentiles had what law? Law of the... That's what I think it is, yes. But in Romans 2, the language is the law of the conscience written on their hearts. So, but yes, I think that would be the patriarchal law. So, who are the scribes? Here's another group we're going to see often in Mark's gospel account. Who are the scribes? The ones that copied down the law, right? A class of people whose job it was to transcribe documents, and in the context of the New Testament, these were people who were transcribing the law of Moses. All right? So, if you spent all day transcribing the law of Moses, what did you come to learn pretty well? The law of Moses. And so for that reason, scribes are often called what? Lawyers, right? Often in the King James Version, you will see lawyers mentioned. In Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, these lawyers would be the scribes because they spent their days transcribing the law of Moses. And so if you had a question about the law of Moses, oftentimes who would you go to? You would go to a scribe who would be able to do what? They'd be able to do what? Yeah, quote the law to you, okay? But Jesus, when he comes on the scene, people are taken back by his teaching. And the text tells us he was teaching with what? Authority, not like whom? Not like the scribes, right? He taught them as one who had authority, not as the scribes. Why didn't the scribes teach with authority? What's the difference that's being drawn out there?
They seem to kind of have been corrupted with the Pharisees.
You do have this corruption with the Pharisees going on there. I think that's a big part of it. What else?
Well, if you're a scholar of something, you don't create it yourself.
Okay.
Like when Amy Coney Barrett said, I'm not going to legislate from the bench, I'm going to follow what's written by the legislature.
Sure. Okay. So you've got a lawgiver versus a law scholar. Okay. I think that's a good picture.
And the scribes did not have any political positioning in the hierarchy.
They weren't supposed to.
Right.
Now, they end up getting drawn in with the Pharisees quite a bit, and I'm sure the Sadducees had their own scribes as well. But ideally, they would be just this neutral party.
They were not a prophet. They were not a...
Yeah, this isn't
Or a
a,
priest.
yeah, this isn't an office per se. Right.
And it didn't have, whatever office it wasn't religious.
Right.
It wasn't a position within the religious hierarchy, I should
Right.
say.
Scribe was a job that people would have all across the board. It wasn't specifically a law that was in conjunction, an occupation, rather, that was in conjunction with the law of Moses. Not all scribes were scribes of the law of Moses, but there were scribes of the law of Moses. Back to the question about authority, if you go and ask a scribe, say, is it lawful to pull an ox out of a ditch? And what might the scribe say to you? Would a scribe say that? What would a scribe say? Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. You shall do no common work. It is a Sabbath unto the Lord. You shall keep the Sabbath day holy. What would a scribe do? A scribe wouldn't tell you their opinion. A scribe wouldn't even explain. A scribe would simply do what? Quote what they had written. They knew the law, and so they would quote it. Thus, the distinction with Jesus when he comes in, is it lawful to pull an ox out of a ditch? He's going to go to the law of Moses and explain why or why not that particular act would be lawful, versus a scribe who would simply do what? Quote the law of Moses.
Just like the devils believe in trembling.
Yeah, exactly. Same kind of... Are you calling the scribes devils? No. All right, who were the Pharisees? Dun, dun, dun. Okay, yeah. That's what we know about the Pharisees. Right? The Sadducees were sad, you see, because they did not believe in the resurrection. The Pharisees did. All right? Well, I believe in the resurrection, so do you, Rebecca. Does that make us Pharisees?
I guess so.
All right, so tell me, that's a good point. Tell me something else about the Pharisees. Jeff.
They believed in angels and miracles
They did?
and tithing.
Yes, they certainly believed in tithing, right? Believed in tithing more than what?
Love.
Love and mercy and kindness and justice, yeah. Kind of harsh. What else can you tell me about the Pharisees? They thought they were righteous. They thought they were pretty special people. Glenn?
I was just going to say that, and people refer to that day as somebody that goes strictly by the law, absent of heart.
Okay. Yeah, and I like that you threw in that last bit there. Did Jesus ever condemn the Pharisees for keeping the law? No. He condemned them for what? For their attitude, for failing to keep the whole law. And in the elements that they did keep the law, they kept it without what? Without love, without mercy, without kindness, without justice, without their heart. That was the problem. The Pharisee was the person who used the law as kind of their own tool. Jesus, when he talks in, the quote that comes up, you make tithe of mint and cumin and anise, and you neglect the weightier matters of the law, right? Love and mercy and justice. These you ought to have done without leaving the others undone, Jesus says. Problem wasn't that they were keeping the law. The problem was that they were not keeping the whole law, and what parts of the law they were keeping incorrectly.
Isn't there a verse that says all their works they do to be seen of you?
Yeah, that's Matthew chapter 5. Yep.
They also created additional laws.
Yeah. Yeah, so the Pharisees, anyone know when the Pharisees really come on the scene? Yeah, it's that what we would call the 400 years of biblical silence, or if you want to be really scholarly, the intertestamental period, right? The intertestamental period of the Jews with, who's the big guy? Bonus points if you can get this. Who was the big Jewish guy during the intertestamental period? We don't read about him in Scripture. Yeah, Judas Maccabees, and there's John. Anyone know who John? Not John the Baptist, not John the Apostle. What's the mascot for Tulsa, Clint? John. Take a guess. John Hyrcanus. John Hyrcanus, that's right. All right, so you've got Judas Maccabees, you've got John Hyrcanus. You've got two people here in the intertestamental period who are noted for fighting back against what? The Greeks and the Romans, that's right. But the real enemy during the intertestamental period, as Jeff mentioned, are the Greeks. And it's not necessarily that you were having Greek excursions into Jerusalem, although sometimes that may have happened. But the real threat from Greece was what? Hellenization, the culture, right? They weren't necessarily coming in and storming Jerusalem and things like that, but they were going to take over Jerusalem with their culture and lifestyle. Who saw that as a problem? Yep, and a whole group of people who decided they were going to band together and fight against what? Fight against the Hellenization, the Greekiness of Jewish society. And so they formed themselves into this group called the Pharisees. What does Pharisee actually mean? Anyone know? The separatists. The separatists. Make sense? They formed themselves into this group called the separatists, the Pharisees. And what do? Clint kind of hinted at it earlier. What do? We've got the law of Moses. That's good and well. But if we really want to make sure that we adhere to the law of Moses, what do we need to do?
Add it to it.
We need to come up with some other laws alongside to kind of rope in a boundary so that we make sure that we don't do what? Violate the law of Moses. So we're going to add in these additional laws. Okay? Yeah, a creed, very much so. Okay? And so they're noted for their adherence to tradition that at times ran afoul of the law of Moses itself. Matthew 15 is a great example of this, the law of Corban. That children were to honor their father and mother, and that included supporting their father and mother as they aged. But the Pharisees and some others of the Jews would try to get around this by saying, well, the money, Mom and Dad, that I was going to give to you, I've actually dedicated to what? To Jerusalem, to the temple. And because I've done that, I don't have anything left to support you. I'm really sorry. Well, what was the problem?
Their heart.
Yeah, their heart, right? They had come up with this kind of excuse, but it ran them afoul of the law of Moses, and Jesus calls them on it there in Matthew chapter 5. And I think we talk about that a little bit later here in Mark's gospel account as well. So those are the Pharisees. When you think Pharisee, think separatist. We want to make sure we don't run afoul of the law of Moses, and so we're going to create some of these different laws and traditions to make sure we don't run afoul of the law of Moses. That's where they come in. Started with good intentions?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. But what happened over time? Corrupted into what you see then in the New Testament. Perhaps a warning to us, right?
The warning to me, to us also is, well, if this is good, then if we can just crank the screws down a little tighter,
It's even better.
then we're even better.
Yeah.
We're even more sanctified.
Yep.
We're even more pure because we can bind this on everybody. You can just say, hey, let's don't do that. Let's make it even more binding.
And then we'll see problems with that all throughout the New Testament, not only in the Gospels, but also when we get into Acts and 1 Corinthians and Galatians and places like that. Jeff?
I think that there's just such a danger of people worshiping things that they can see instead of things that they can't.
Yeah.
I mean, how many times a day do you drive by signs in people's yards that say, pray for our country? I'm not opposed to praying for our country.
That's good.
But, the Bible says pray for your leaders,
Yeah.
but how many people care more about their country or their group or their identity or their lifestyle than actually care about their soul?
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, we're all going to heaven, everybody's going to heaven. You don't need to worry about that. Just pray for this.
Sure.
Well, okay. I mean, to me, the Pharisees are more interested in being hardcore law of Moses people than they are anything that's really about
Okay.
goodness.
I want you to hold on to that because when we get into Mark 3 in just a minute, we're coming back to that. But they're hardcore on the law of Moses and they're lacking, what did you say?
Goodness?
Okay, remember that. Jeff said goodness. Remember that. We're coming back to it, okay? In a good way, we're coming back to it. You're not in trouble, Jeff. Okay. Let's wrap up with this. I think we're wrapping up with this one. Who were the Herodians? We don't hear about this group a whole lot, do we, Christy? Don't hear a lot about the Herodians, no. So, who were the Herodians? Ma'am? They favored Rome. Why did they favor Rome? The power came from Rome. So who are the Herodians? What do you see in there? Tracy, don't say Rod. Yeah, you see Herod, okay? You see Herod. Who was Herod? Was there just one Herod? No, Herod is not a name, right? Herod was a title, just like Caesar. Look at y'all. We're doing good this morning. You had your coffee. That's good. Herod is a title, just like Caesar was a title. That's right. So who were the Herods? They are the ruling party where?
In that region of Palestine.
Yeah, Judea, the area of Judea. That's right. They are the leading ruling family, and they have been appointed, as Rebecca pointed out, by Rome. Okay, so the Herods were appointed as rulers of Judea by Rome. So if you were a Herodian, you were in that party. You were a supporter of the Herods. Why did the Herods find themselves in a difficult place? You are trying to keep peace with two groups that absolutely can't stand each other. One especially so. The Jews can't stand Rome. Rome looks at the Jews as kind of what?
A thorn.
Yeah, they're a thorn. They're the ants that sometimes sneak into your kitchen, right? They're not really going to destroy anything, but they're what? They are an annoyance and they're troublesome, right? So Rome has thought about and has in the past laid down some insecticide on those ants before, right? And just in case, if we're going to continue our ant analogy, just in case the Jews are thinking about doing something to overthrow Rome, Rome has kind of left the bodies of the dead ants around, right? If you were going into the temple at Jerusalem and you were looking up, I think at the northwest corner, what are you going to see? The fortress Antonia. And who was stationed in the fortress Antonia? A garrison of Roman troops. You're in your most holy place as an Israelite, and you're looking up as a Jew, and there's Rome's reminder that what?
They're in charge.
We're here. And the only reason you can come in here right now is because we have graciously allowed you to live. All right? So the Herods are trying to navigate this area between Rome and Judea, and it's problematic. That's why the Herods are really going to be despised by a whole lot of people. They're trying to straddle the fence post, and it's not working out well for anyone. All right, Mark 3, 1 through 6. Jesus entered again into a synagogue, and a man was there with a withered hand. They were watching him to see if he would heal him on the Sabbath in order that they might accuse him. And he said to the man with the withered hand, "Rise and come forward." And he said to them, "Is it lawful on the Sabbath to do good or to do harm, to save a life or to kill?" But they kept silent. And after looking around at them with anger, grieved at their hardness of heart, he said to the man, "Stretch out your hand." And he stretched it out, and his hand was restored. And the Pharisees went out and immediately began taking counsel with the Herodians against him as to how they might destroy him. All right, here's the first thing I notice. Maybe you catch this too. We have a lot of pronouns in the first 6 verses, don't we? Do we have a lot of antecedents to our pronouns? No. In fact, perhaps the only antecedent that we have to the pronouns of they and them is going to be found in verse 6, which comes after all the pronouns, where the they or the them could possibly be whom? The Pharisees, or the Pharisees and the Herodians, okay? You've got parallel accounts here, which really wouldn't help the people who were reading this originally, because Mark is probably written before Matthew or Luke, but we have the benefit of having all three, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. The parallel accounts are there in chapter 12 of Matthew and chapter 6 of Luke. Who is watching Jesus carefully on the Sabbath?
Pharisees.
Okay, I think that's a pretty safe assumption. Considering what you read there in verse 6, that makes sense. It seems to be the Pharisees who were watching Jesus really, really closely. And we'll look at this from Luke in just a second. What has Jesus done that would prompt the Pharisees to seek to destroy him?
This is just a thought that
Okay.
popped in my head as you were asking the question, but he was more holy than them.
Okay.
And that was what I was thinking, they're so strict on the law. We're even, we're even better than the average
Okay.
Christian. And here Jesus is, he has a sense of being holy.
Okay. Do they view him as being holy?
No, but I see the fire burning because
Okay.
of him.
That's a good point. Yeah, he's eating with the tax collectors and the sinners, right?
He's claiming to be the Messiah.
He's claiming to be the Son of God, isn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a problem. And if what Mark is writing about here comes after the events of John chapter 4, then he has claimed to be the Messiah already, in addition to being the Son of God. So that creates a lot of problems. Ashley, you were saying something? What were you saying?
Well, they view some of this as him breaking the law.
Yeah, and if you... Pharisees are very, very selective in their adherence to the law of Moses. But under the law of Moses, if you engaged in high-handed rebellion, and I think that's the term in the King James Version, if you engaged in rebellion against the law of Moses and you did it willfully, you did it knowingly, and it didn't stop you from doing it, what was the punishment? You're supposed to be stoned. Okay? Which is part of what's going to happen there in John chapter 8, when the woman is taken in adultery and thrown down before Jesus. And, teacher, what do you say that we should do? Law of Moses says we should stone her, but what do you say? And Jesus writes in the dirt. What was one big problem there? Where's the man? Where's the man? You've got very selective enforcement of these laws from the Pharisees. Remember back to last week, Jesus pops the question, you're going to get mad at my disciples for snacking on the Sabbath, which was allowed, but you're not going to say anything about whom? About David. Okay? And we talked about the two different views you could take of that passage. But you've got the Pharisees being very, very selective in what they are going to enforce from the law of Moses, and I think, Ashley, that's exactly what you see going on here. He speaks with authority, and in speaking with authority, he spoke against whom? He spoke against them. Okay? Why else might they be wanting to destroy Jesus? Jeff?
Because they can't heal anybody's withered hand.
Because they can't heal anybody's withered hand. They can't cast a demon out of anybody. They can't make the lame walk, the blind to see. They can't do any of that, but this guy can. What is he then?
He's a demon.
Yeah, he's a threat.
It's especially the fact that the following of Jesus is growing rapidly.
Okay, and I think that's a big one too. John chapter 4 is going to tell us that Jesus baptizes more disciples than John, although he himself baptized no one. You've got more people. Remember, John the Baptist is described, who was going out to John to be baptized? All of Judea. But now we're finding out Jesus has even more followers than John. Who's that a problem for? For the Pharisees. Did you have your hand up, Rebecca?
I think it's John chapter 12, where they say that one man must die rather than the whole
Uh-huh.
man be lost. They feared the Romans.
Yep.
And they thought, this man claims to be king. The Romans are going to come in
what little good thing we got going on here, we don't want to lose it. Right? Anyone else?
I was just
Gwen?
going to say it threatened their power.
Yeah, absolutely. So, a couple of ones I came up with. Jesus approved of John the Baptist. He's baptizing disciples, working miracles, gaining a following, challenging their knowledge and their application of the law. What had he just done at the end of chapter 2? You want to get mad at my disciples for what they're doing? Why don't you explain this to me? Explain David to me. Was David just or unjust in what he did? And once you answer that, I'm going to answer you this. Or the baptism of John, was it from heaven or from men? You answer me, then I'll answer you. They didn't want to get into that, did they? It shuts them down, that's right. So what are they going to do here in chapter 3? They're watching him carefully. He sees this man with the withered hand, and he asks him to stand up. And before doing anything with the man, he's going to turn to them and say what? I'm about to do something here. You tell me, is it lawful? And they're going to accuse him of what? Blaspheming by violating the Sabbath by doing what? By healing. Okay?
What made him so mad was they weren't happy for the man getting his hand healed.
Okay. Jeff, you're exactly where I'm going with this. Okay? I want you to consider for just a moment with me just how absolutely callous the Pharisees are here. Okay? I took Matthew, Mark, and Luke and kind of all put them together so we can see how this probably flowed. Matthew and Luke provide a little bit of information that Mark doesn't. So starting in Matthew. Departing from there, he went into their synagogue. And behold, there was a man with a withered hand, and they questioned him, saying, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath? So who starts the questioning? The Pharisees do. Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath? And Jesus said to the man with the withered hand, rise and come forward. Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath? Hey, come here. And Jesus said to them, I ask you. This is just like with John the Baptist and the baptism of John. This is just like with David. You want me to answer your question, you're going to have to do what? Answer mine. I ask you, is it lawful on the Sabbath to do good or to do evil, to save a life or to destroy it? But they did what? They rang the bell and signaled class was almost over. What did they do? They kept silent. They keep silent? Yeah, I missed that one, sorry. And after looking around at them with anger, grieved at their hardness of heart, he said to the man, stretch out your hand, and he stretched it out again. And his hand was restored, and the Pharisees went out and immediately began taking counsel with the Herodians against him as to how they might destroy him. Now, flip over to, let's look at Matthew's account in Matthew 12. Matthew 12. And Jeff, this is getting to your point here. Matthew 12 and verse 9 is where Matthew's account of this begins. He departed from there. After verse 8, and this is the same thing in Mark. In both instances, before we transition to this healing on the Sabbath, Jesus is declared to be what? Son of God, Son of Man, Lord of the Sabbath. Okay? He's Lord of the Sabbath. Verse 9. Departing from there, he went into their synagogue, and behold, there was a man with a withered hand. And they questioned him, saying, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath, in order that they might accuse him? And he said to them, what man shall there be among whom? Okay. Matthew records Jesus getting pretty pointed here. What man is there among you who shall have one sheep, and if it falls into a pit on the Sabbath, will he not take hold of it and lift it out? Of how much more value then is a man than a sheep? So then it is lawful to do good on the Sabbath. Look at how callous the Pharisees are here. They all but confirm who is more valuable than this man. The sheep, the lamb, the ox, the donkey, the cow. They're all more valuable than whom? Than the man with the withered hand. Just how awful. And it's not just that. Remember, no we don't, but I'll pull it back up. Who starts this entire line of questioning? It's not Jesus, it's whom? The Pharisees concoct this scenario where here is this poor handicapped man over here, and they pick him up in front of everybody, put his disability on display, and say, what? Are you going to heal him? Jesus says, of course I'm going to heal him, because he's more important than what? Than an animal. Which is just exactly how you view him. Now, do we know why the Pharisees want to kill Jesus? He is calling them on the carpet. Here is a man who was created by God, and not just that, a man that I created. I brought this man into existence. John chapter 1 and verse 3. And you're going to tell me that an animal is more valuable than him? Should this alter how we look at our fellow humans? Back in the 30s and 40s and 50s and 60s, should this have altered how folks viewed people of different skin colors and ethnicities and cultures? Absolutely. Do we need to make sure that we don't fall into those same traps? Absolutely. The Pharisees all but confirmed they viewed their animals as more important, significant, and worthy than this impaired man. And they're willing to bring him up and set him up in front of everybody to try to make themselves look good. And Jesus has absolutely none of it. And so we understand then why Mark and Luke and Matthew are going to talk about Jesus being grieved in his heart because of their hardness of heart. They just don't care about people. They care about themselves. That's why they would never come to Jesus as the good physician, because they don't view themselves as being sick, because they view everyone else as being the problem and not themselves. But let's get to, in the couple of minutes we have right here, let's get to kind of what is the big question here. From Mark chapter 3 and verse 4. Is it lawful on the Sabbath to do good or to do harm, to save a life or to kill? Of course, they're not going to answer, but Jesus asks this question for a reason. Was an act of healing a violation of the Sabbath? That is bell number 2, isn't it? Kevin Hopkins is going to research this question for us and give us a page typed to double-spaced. No, I'm just kidding.
Not if you're the one being healed.
Yeah, not if you're the one being healed, and not if the Lord of Sabbath says what? This is okay, which is going to be the point.